There are days when one believes they're stepping into happiness, yet in truth, they're only walking through a storm wrapped in white silk. The October air was unusually soft and clear on the day Cheryl entered St. Thomas Church in New York. Light streamed through stained glass windows, scattering over the marble floor like fragments of broken rainbows. Someone might have thought it was a beautiful ceremony, but Cheryl knew better. That beauty was only a thin veneer covering a deep, echoing loneliness. The dress she wore, a simple white silk gown, was borrowed from her college roommate. No one from her husband's family had asked whether she needed a wedding dress or wished to try on one of the Kapper family heirlooms, worn by generations of their women. To them, she was not someone worthy of that silk. As Cheryl walked down the long aisle and the music rose gracefully around her, every gaze from the right side where the Kapper family sat felt like a blade aimed straight at her heart. They sat there, upright and unmoving, as if carved from pride. Dawson Kapper, the patriarch and CEO of a multi-billion-dollar empire, sat in the front row. His gaze froze the air around him. His eyes had no fatherly joy, only contempt disguised as civility. Beside him was Hollis, a gentle but faint presence, her eyes darting away each time Cheryl looked toward her. The seats on the left were sparse, and Cheryl's few friends and relatives sat there. A handful of college faces, 2 close colleagues, and an elderly neighbor from her old apartment in Atlanta. They watched her with pride and quiet pity. However, Cheryl kept her eyes fixed on the one man who had made her believe that love could stand against the world. Lorie Kapper, the groom, stood waiting. His eyes searched for her in a perfectly tailored dark suit, as though every sound in the church had faded away. When their eyes met, her steps felt lighter, as if someone had taken hold of her heartbeat to steady it. He had once told her, "They'll try to make you feel small, but you're the biggest thing I've ever known." As the priest began the ceremony, each word sounded distant, like waves far away. Cheryl tried not to meet the cold stares and kept her hands from trembling. Everything passed in a slow dream, punctuated only by the rhythm of her heart between the prayers. When the moment for vows arrived, Lorie held her hand tightly. That grip said everything. "We are not alone. We'll walk out of here together, no matter the storm outside." His voice rang out, steady enough to silence the entire church. "I do, today and forever. Even if I lose everything, I still choose her." "Oh." A ripple of whispers swept through the right-side pews like a cold wind. Someone gasped. Someone frowned. Dawson's knuckles turned white on the armrest. And Cheryl smiled. It wasn't a smile of triumph, but the calm acceptance of someone who understood the price already paid. When their lips met in the wedding kiss, Cheryl heard a faint sound, perhaps a stifled breath, or maybe the quiet shattering of an illusion. After the ceremony, the church filled with voices, footsteps, and the scent of expensive perfume. Yet Cheryl remembered only Lorie's eyes as he reached for her hand. "Let's go. We can start our life right now." The reception took place at the Kapper estate in Connecticut, a breathtaking and suffocating place. High ceilings crowned with chandeliers, marble columns, and fresh flowers lining the aisles. Beautiful, grand, cold as ice. She stepped inside and felt like a stranger in a play she hadn't auditioned for. Whispers spread quickly through the crowd. "Is she pregnant?" "Of course she is. No one marries this fast without a reason." Cheryl smiled, raised her glass, straightened her back as if every rumor was wind brushing past her dress. Then Dawson stood. Silence fell. He lifted his glass, a half smile on his lips. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his deep voice resonant, "marriage is the union of 2 families of values, traditions, and legacies passed down through generations." Cheryl knew what was coming, yet her gaze remained calm. "Some marry to continue a tradition," Dawson said slowly, "and others marry for an illusion that love can replace legacy." The room froze. Someone dropped a spoon. Lorie's hand tightened around hers under the table. "My son," Dawson continued, "has chosen that illusion." A murmur swept through the hall. Cheryl's hand went cold, but she lifted her chin. No tears, no reaction, just silence. Lorie rose to his feet. The scrape of his chair on the marble floor sliced through the air. "Father," he said evenly, You taught me about power, but never about love. And he took Cheryl's hand and drew her up beside him. She's the only lesson I ever needed. The room went deathly still. No one moved. Lorie looked his father in the eye. If you can't accept the woman I love, I don't want that legacy. I chose her, today and forever. Dawson stood frozen, his face flushing red, his lips trembling like a man struck across the face. Lorie turned to Cheryl and whispered, "Let's go." And so they left. Amid gowns and glittering lights, two people walked away hand in hand from what the world called paradise, leaving in silence. No applause, no goodbyes. Only the wind outside and the chill of October wrapping around them. They drove through the night. Neither spoke. Streetlights slid across the windshield, reflecting in the tears Cheryl tried to hide. When the car finally turned into Brooklyn Heights, the city had quieted. Lorie parked in front of a small hotel he had booked in advance. Not the luxurious penthouse his father had arranged, but a simple room with a bed, a window, and freedom. When the door closed behind them, Cheryl stood still for a long time. She removed her bracelet, her bouquet, and then she wept, not from humiliation, but from everything she had held back all day. Lorie came over and held her close. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Don't be," she said. "You saved me from something worse than insult falsehood." They sat on the bed, bathed in the soft glow of a yellow lamp. "You know," she murmured, "I thought love would be welcomed, but today I learned some places only love power. And some people," he replied, "only love until it costs them something, but not me." She looked up, her tearful eyes glimmering. "You lost everything because of me," Lorie smiled. "No, I left behind everything unworthy so I could keep what matters most." They kissed in a small room, with no music, no roses, just the sound of their hearts. Each beat an unspoken vow. Even if we lose the world, we still have each other. Later, as they lay together, moonlight brushing her hair, Cheryl whispered, "Do you think they'll leave us alone?" "No," Lorie said. "They'll try to make us regret it. But you know what? I'm more afraid of a world where I don't get to love you." She smiled. "You're ridiculous. Maybe. But it's the ridiculous I choose." Outside, the city glowed. A couple on the upper floor of a small hotel, two people who had just walked out of paradise, were beginning to build their own world, bare-handed. Cheryl lay still, listening to the distant hum of cars and Lorie's heartbeat's steady rhythm. She thought of Dawson's words, of those cold stares, and suddenly she felt light. "Maybe," she whispered, "being cast out of where we don't belong is how we find where we truly do." Lorie nodded softly, brushing her hair aside. "You are that place." That night, they slept in each other's arms. No flowers, diamond rings, or grand celebration. But there was one thing the entire Connecticut estate would never have: love without fear. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains. Cheryl woke first, stepped onto the small balcony, and looked down at the street below. People passing, cars honking. Laughter life went on, as if the world had no idea that a small revolution had begun in an ordinary room last night. She smiled lightly, truly. Inside, Lorie was still asleep, his hand resting on the space where she'd been. She walked over and kissed his forehead. "Wake up," she whispered. "We've got a long way to go." He opened his eyes and smiled. "I've been ready since last night." Their story began there, not in glittering halls, but in a small room, in a vast city, with two hearts that believed love could be stronger than legacy, power, and fear itself. 3 years after the wedding, everything had changed. There was no borrowed dress, no small room in Brooklyn Heights. Cheryl and Lorie were now ordinary people in an anything but ordinary world. After being cut off from the Kapper family, they lived off their savings until Cheryl was hired, ironically by her old company, Kapper Global Holdings, as a strategic advisor. Her talent and experience made it impossible to overlook her. Dawson agreed, not out of forgiveness, but because he wanted to prove she would fail right there, on his own turf. But Cheryl didn't fail. She worked relentlessly, turning lifeless reports into million-dollar strategies. She saw what no one else dared to say, that managing through fear was draining the company of creativity, and she quietly began to change that. In 3 years, revenue doubled. When the monthly reports reached Dawson, he would often glance at the numbers, pause, and ask, "Who wrote this?" "Ms. Cheryl Hart." He would nod coolly. "Good, but don't let her think she's indispensable." "Ho!" A sting followed every compliment. "You're quite talented, must be luck. You're smart. I'm sure you've learned a lot from your husband." Words light as smoke, sharp enough to choke. Cheryl didn't respond. She smiled instead. She had learned to let her smile do the fighting. Lorie worked at a tech design firm in Midtown. He refused to use any of his family's connections or even the Kapper name for contracts. They lived, renting a small apartment with a balcony overlooking the East River. Every evening, after long days apart, Cheryl would tell him about the company cold meetings, skeptical glances, small victories unacknowledged. Lorie would smile. "You don't need their approval. You need the truth on your side. But truth isn't always enough against deceit." Thessaly, Lorie's cousin, couldn't stand that woman was trusted within the family's empire. She began spreading rumors accusing Cheryl of stealing internal data, making questionable decisions, and ruling by intimidation. The lies crept through the corridors of Kappa Global's 37th floor. Then one day, Cheryl was summoned to the boardroom. It was different that morning. Dawson sat at the head of the table, Thessaly beside him, and several board members around. The air was thick. No one greeted her. A black folder lay on the table. "Miss Luckett," Dawson began, his tone soft but hard-edged. "Serious issues with the new industrial project. Some of your decisions have led to millions in losses." Cheryl opened the folder. Every figure was distorted, documents edited. She knew she'd been framed. "You know this isn't true," she said, meeting his eyes. "What I know," Dawson replied, "is that this company doesn't need anyone who thinks they're bigger than it." He paused. "You have 5 minutes to clear your desk and leave." Bo! The room fell silent. Cheryl heard her heartbeat, steady and loud, but she didn't tremble. 5 minutes. A lifetime folded into 5 minutes. She stood, no pleading, no protest. "Thank you," she said quietly but clearly. Dawson frowned. "Thank me? For what?" "For finally being honest. You never wanted me here. Now you've said it." The room froze. She closed the folder and slid it back across the table. "I don't need another second." Then she walked out. As she passed through the work area, typing slowed. People looked up. Some avoided her gaze. Others rose silently. The first was Kemp Reeves, the operations director who had quietly supported her. "Where you go, I go," he said. Then Ramona Vega, a young Latina analyst, stood. Then Derek Miles, a senior engineer and single father. One, then two, then dozens. By the time Cheryl reached the elevator, 22 people had followed her out of Kappa Global, leaving behind a floor full of empty desks and a dynasty that didn't yet understand what had just happened. They carried some photos, old coffee mugs, and the belief that no one should have to work for a company built on fear. Cheryl stood before the elevator, glanced back at the shining Kappa Global Holdings logo, and whispered to herself, "You gave me 5 minutes to pack. I'll take 5 years to make you remember." The elevator doors closed. That afternoon, they gathered in a small cafe on Lexington Avenue. Outside, rain traced long lines down the window. Cheryl looked around 22 faces, different ages, colors, titles, but one shared look. People who had lost everything, yet hadn't lost faith. Kemp spoke first. "What now?" Cheryl smiled. "We start over." "With what?" Ramona asked. "We have no capital, no office, no clients." "And?" Cheryl looked down at her cold coffee. "With honor." The table fell silent. Then Derek, gray-haired and steady, nodded. "I believe you. You once said, 'Work is only good when you can hold your head up.' I want to keep working like that." One by one, they nodded. A small group in a city of millions, but in that moment, they had each other. Lorie arrived, rain-soaked, having run from Midtown the moment he heard. "You okay?" he asked. Cheryl smiled, eyes bright. Better than I thought. They gave me 5 minutes, but I left in 1. I'm saving the rest for the future. Lorie looked around at the tired, shining faces. We can rebuild, he said. We don't need much, just faith. And so the exodus began, the collective departure of 22 people from the Kapper empire. Later, it would be remembered as a legend in American business. 3 weeks later, they rented a damp old basement in Seattle. It was cheap, and no one wanted to lease office space to the Kapper defectors. The walls were stained, the ceiling low, the air conditioner rattled, but the room was full of laughter. They dragged in old desks, ran their own cables, painted the walls themselves, and scrawled the first words in white paint across the central board. We build with love, not fear. Chúng ta xây bằng yêu thương, không bằng sợ hãi. Everyone pitched in their savings. Cheryl sold her diamond wedding ring to buy a printer. When Lorie found out, he said nothing, just slipped a cheap silver ring onto her finger. Diamonds can be lost, he said, but this hand I'll never let go. They reached out to old clients. Most refused. We don't work with traitors. You have no backing. Who even are you? Cheryl replied to every email the same way. We don't sell promises. We keep them. The first month, they had no contracts. Their savings ran low. Ramona cried once. Derek cried twice. Some nights, Cheryl sat alone in the dark, staring at the stained ceiling, wondering, did I make a mistake? But every time that thought flickered, she remembered Dawson's voice. 5 minutes. No, she wouldn't let him be right. One late night, Kemp called her outside. There's a small company in Portland looking for partners. I sent our profile. Cheryl smiled. Our first chance. Maybe. But they want to meet in person. Tomorrow morning. Portland? Do we have the money? Kemp gave a wry grin. Enough for bus tickets. So the next morning, Cheryl and Kemp rode 10 hours by bus to Portland. They wore old suits and carried a cheap printed presentation. The company's director, a young man, looked at her and asked, You used to work for Kapper? Yes, Cheryl said. And you were fired? No, she smiled. I left. Why? Because they thought loyalty meant fear. I think the opposite. The man studied her, then said, This contract is small, but if you deliver, I'll tell everyone I know. Cheryl smiled. You don't have to tell them. Just come back. They signed their first deal, just a few tens of thousands of dollars, but to them, it was an entire world. In Seattle, Cheryl opened a cheap bottle of wine and poured it evenly among the 22. No one will remember our names today, she said, but one day they will. Not because we're rich, but because we're decent. Applause filled the room. Ramona cried again. Lorie leaned close and whispered, I once said they gave you 5 minutes. Now you've started writing your 5-year plan. Cheryl nodded, glancing around the cramped room. We lost our jobs, she said, but we found our reason. That night, rain fell softly over Seattle. In the small basement, yellow light glowed on the hand-painted sign. We build with love, not fear. In a cold city, 22 people laughed together, tiny sparks of warmth at the dawn of something new. A new empire, born from 5 minutes of humiliation. When people start from nothing, they often think they're ready. But no one is ever truly ready for emptiness, for waking up, not knowing what to eat that day, or for nights when the lights go out and you have to smile, so others won't be afraid of the sound of your own hunger. December in Seattle was bitterly cold. Wind from Elliott Bay swept through the wet streets, slipping through the cracks of the basement that Cheryl's team had turned into their first makeshift office. A small sign hung on the old iron door. LKI Innovations Hand, painted in white by Ramona. Under the yellow light, it looked both clumsy and brave. On the first morning, they sat around a long wooden table bought second-hand. Cheryl stood at the head, her hair tied back, her face pale from sleepless nights. We don't have money, she said, but we have skill, faith, and each other. From now on, there's no boss here, no hierarchy. We're family. Kemp Reeves, the oldest of them, smiled gently. Families argue, you know. Cheryl nodded. As long as we don't walk away. Soft laughter rippled through the room. The morning began with thin coffee and thick conviction. No clients came on the first day, nor the second. On the third, Derek brought sandwiches to share. "Free lunch," he joked, "but whoever eats has to say one positive thing about today." Ramona grinned. "The good thing is we still have electricity." Laughter filled the room. Cheryl sat quietly, watching them, and something inside her softened. She thought of her days at Kapper, the polished conference rooms, expensive coffee, the nervous eyes that darted away whenever Dawson entered. Now she sat among people with nothing left to lose. Yet they laughed freely, honestly. Maybe, she thought, this is the real beginning. That night, Cheryl stayed late, bent over the financial report. The column for expenses ran 3 pages longer than income. Lorie came home from work, carrying 2 boxes of noodles and a small candle. "Lights out?" he asked. "We're saving power. So this candle's for hope, not dinner, right?" She laughed. Both. They ate noodles together, candlelight flickering across her tired face. "You know," Lorie said, "I was afraid of being poor. But now, being poor with you is less frightening than being rich and alone." Cheryl touched his hand. "Because we're not really poor. We have each other, belief, and a whole world to prove wrong." Heavy rain drummed on the thin metal roof that night, like an ancient rhythm cheering for those who dared to rebuild from ashes. Ramona burst through the door the next morning, shouting, "We got a call, a client wants to hear our pitch." The room froze, half in disbelief. Cheryl smiled. "Then our breakfast today is on the house hope." They worked all night preparing. By the time of the presentation, Cheryl wore her oldest suit, Lorie carried the documents, and Kemp checked the projector for the 10th time. The client's office was small, but when Cheryl began to speak, the whole room seemed to glow. She didn't use corporate jargon. She spoke from her heart. "We believe business only matters when people feel respected." A pause, then the director smiled. "You'll lose a lot of contracts talking like that." "Maybe," Cheryl said, "but contracts built on trust never get lost." When they left the building, Cheryl didn't know if they'd won the deal, but Lorie's eyes told her that, whatever the outcome, they'd already won something bigger: confidence. 3 months passed. Still no major contracts. They survived on small projects just enough to pay rent and utilities, but their spirit never dimmed. Every morning, Cheryl made coffee, read the paper, and sent client proposals. Ramona played soft jazz, Derek fixed the printer, and Kemp checked the network. They had only 8 computers named by number and feeling hope, faith, courage, and others. One evening, as people were packing up, Lorie walked in holding an envelope. "Letter from Dawson," he said quietly. The room went still. Cheryl opened it. Inside was a check for $500,000 and a handwritten note. "Lawrence, you are still my blood. Come back. Leave her. She's the burden that's dragging you down. I'll give you everything again." Signed, Dawson Kapper. Cheryl stared at the words, her lips trembling. Lorie read it, then let out a faint laugh. "Strange. He still thinks I'm for sale." "What will you do?" she asked. "Burn it." He struck a match and watched the blue flame consume the check. Silence filled the room. Cheryl looked at him, the fire reflecting in both eyes, beautiful and tragic. "You just turned down $500,000, she whispered. "No," Lorie said. "I just chose a life worth more than that." That night, Cheryl stayed behind alone. She opened her laptop and began typing a new email. "Kapper can buy people, but not faith. Call me if you want to work with a company that keeps its word. Cheryl Luckett, LKI Innovations." She sent it to 17 former Kapper partners. 2 days passed. No replies. On the 3rd, one came. It was from the CEO of Harper & Ray Industries, a medical equipment company. "I met you at a conference last year," he wrote. "I remember you said, 'True leadership is making people want to follow you, not fear you.' See me. I want to hear more." Cheryl read that email over and over, then printed it and taped it to the wall right beside their motto, "We build with love, not fear." The day they met Harper and Ray, rain poured over Seattle. Cheryl went with Lorie and Kemp. They presented for 2 hours, no inflated promises, no glossy numbers. When they finished, the CEO said, "You reminded me why I started doing business. Then he signed the contract. It wasn't huge, $1.5 million, but it was a miracle to them. They hugged, cried, and shouted. Ramona screamed, "We got a real contract." Derek raised his coffee cup. "And I swear I'm done with instant coffee." Tears streamed down Cheryl's face as she laughed. "From today," she said, "we're not just the ones who walked out. We're a company." That night, they turned the music up, switched on every light, and danced in their cramped basement. The rain kept falling outside, but a fire had been lit inside. The fire of people with nothing but each other was enough to start an empire. After the celebration, Cheryl sat by the window, watching the rain. She thought of Dawson, of the 5 minutes he once gave her. Then she smiled. "Thank you, Dawson Kapper, because without those 5 minutes, I'd never have this moment." In the corner, the light fell on the words, "We build with love, not fear." The small candle Lorie had brought on their first night was still half burned. She blew it out softly and whispered, "We don't need candles anymore. We shine on our own now." The first taste of success is always a double-edged blade. It brings light, and with it, darkness. When LKI Innovations secured the contract with Harper & Ray, Cheryl's name began appearing in financial headlines. The black woman once fired by Kapper returns and wins a deal from their hands. The headlines spread everywhere. At first, the team was thrilled. "Miss Cheryl, you're in business line," Ramona squealed, waving a magazine. Cheryl glanced at it and smiled. "As long as they talk about the work, not my life." It sounded casual, but it was the first crack of thunder before the storm. 3 days later, one of America's most prominent media outlets published an article. Cheryl Luckett, the seductive woman who used charm to climb Kapper Global. Beneath the headline was a candid shot Cheryl stepping out of Kapper's building, sunlight on her face, beside a smiling former executive. The article was thick with phrases like, "Reportedly," "A source claims," and "An unnamed employee revealed." Red. No evidence, only malice. Within 48 hours, the internet exploded. Comments flooded every corner. "She used men to climb up. Now she's playing the victim. This world loves to glorify hypocrisy. If she's so innocent, why did Kapper fire her?" When Ramona handed her the phone, Cheryl only gave a thin smile. "Don't read that," Lorie said. "It's all right," she replied. "They're doing exactly what Dawson wanted, erasing me with humiliation." "Oh, and what will you do?" "Stay silent. But silence doesn't always protect, it endures. And endurance can hurt as much as war." Over the next 3 days, TV networks ran segments on female executives and the dark side of power. Cheryl's image was everywhere, cropped, twisted, sensationalized. Investors hesitated. Partners stopped calling. The phones went quiet. In their small Seattle office, the air grew heavy. Derek said nothing. Ramona wept. Kemp stared at half-finished contracts and sighed. "We're losing everything to a few lines of text," he muttered. Cheryl stood by the window, watching the rain. "No, Kemp," she said softly. "We're only losing those too afraid to believe the truth." That night, when Lorie came home, he found her sitting alone, her arms around her laptop and her eyes swollen. "What did you do?" he asked. "Read all of it. You promised you wouldn't." "I know. But, Lorie, I needed to know what they think I am so I can remember I'm not." He sat beside her and took her hand. "You don't have to prove anything to the world. We only need to prove it to each other." She leaned on his shoulder. "Do you know what it feels like to have a whole country call you a fraud?" "Yes," he said. "When I left my family, they said I was stupid, a traitor, that I'd regret it. But I'm still here with you." Outside, wind lashed against the windows. The wolves were out there, media, power, prejudice, howling in the dark. But in that small apartment, a quiet fire still burned. The next morning, Lorie said something Cheryl would never forget. "You don't have to defend yourself. Let me do that in my own way." "What do you mean?" she asked. "I'll protect the truth, not with statements, but with my heart." And he did, just not in any way she could have imagined. A week later, Good Morning America invited Cheryl to appear. They wanted her to share her journey and respond to the allegations. Her team objected. Kemp said, "It's a trap. They don't want truth, they want drama." Cheryl agreed. Then I won't go. But they won't stop either. When the interview aired, the team gathered around the office TV. The host's tone was slick, half curious, half mocking. We've all heard of Cheryl Hart, the woman who left Kapper with 22 followers. But was that true leadership or emotional manipulation? Cheryl wasn't there, but Lorie was. No one knew he had contacted the show himself. When the host introduced him, "Joining us is Lorie Kapper Jr., husband of Cheryl Hart." The LKI team froze. On screen, Lorie appeared calm, steady, his gaze unwavering. The host asked, "Do you think your wife exploits the Kapper name for fame?" Lorie smiled faintly and said, slowly, "If loving her is exploitation, then I'll gladly be exploited for the rest of my life. And if loving her is wrong, then I don't want to be right." The studio fell silent. The host stammered, "Are you saying, my wife doesn't need my family's name to stand tall? She taught me what self-respect really means. I left the Kapper empire not because she asked me to, but because I refused to live in a world where people need permission to love someone." That image, a white American man in a plain shirt, speaking about his black wife, not with grand words but with raw truth, spread across the country within hours. On Twitter, the hashtag "If loving her is wrong" trended for a week. The hostile headlines began to fade. One network replayed the clip under the title, "The Man Who Chose Love Over Power and Silenced America." That night, Cheryl watched the video, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You're insane," she whispered when Lorie came home. "Maybe. But at least now they know who I'm crazy for." She wrapped her arms around him, holding tight. Outside, rain still fell, but the storm inside them had finally eased. The next morning, hundreds of emails poured into LKI's inbox. "I believe you. Oh, thank you for proving that walking away from power isn't weakness. I was humiliated once too. Now I know I'm not alone." Cheryl read each one, laughing and crying all at once. "See," Lorie said, "the wolves can tear and snarl, but when light comes, they vanish." She nodded, but only because someone dared to hold the light, and she knew he was that light. The man who stood before the world and said that love was never wrong. That night, they opened the windows. The sound of rain and the salt air from Elliott Bay filled the room. Cheryl rested her head on his shoulder and whispered, "I used to think I had to be strong to fight the world. Now I know sometimes being loved enough makes the world weaker." Lorie smiled. "Then let me love you for another lifetime." Outside, the storm broke, and within them, another fire burned, one born not of rage or fear, but of faith redeemed by love. There are things you won't find in any financial report, yet they are the most valuable assets a company can have: loyalty. After the media storm, LKI stood firm. More than that, it began to grow. Within 3 months, the deal with Harper and Ray sparked a domino effect. Small and mid-sized businesses across the West Coast began reaching out to Cheryl not just for her expertise, but for the philosophy she'd once shared in a webinar. "We don't need to fear our leaders. We need to love the work we do." The phrase spread online like cool water through a desert. Cheryl never knew who had recorded that short speech, only that the next morning, LKI's inbox overflowed with messages. "I want to work somewhere people believe in love. Are you hiring? I don't need a high salary, I want to feel proud again." She printed every letter and hung them around the office. The old board that once read, "We build with love, not fear," was replaced with a new one that the whole team wrote together. "We build with loyalty, not fear." Their damp basement was now a bright 2-story office in downtown Seattle. Expansive glass windows let in morning light. The air smelled of coffee and optimism. No more echoing footsteps of people afraid of their boss. Only the easy rhythm of those who believed their work meant something. Kemp Reeves became Chief Operating Officer. Ramona led international clients, and Derek headed the engineering team. Cheryl refused to take a private glass office. Her desk sat in the center, where anyone could approach her, ask for advice, share a story, or sit quietly beside her when tired. One morning, Derek walked in holding an envelope. "Miss Cheryl," he said softly, "I need to take some time off. My daughter, she needs heart surgery." The room went silent. Cheryl stood and took his hand. "Take all the time you need," she said. "We'll cover the medical costs." He froze. I can't accept that. You're not accepting it, Cheryl said. We're sharing it. Families don't count expenses when someone's in pain. Derek broke down crying. Later, he said that moment changed the way he understood loyalty. I'm not loyal because of my paycheck. I'm loyal because she made me believe I matter. Word spread. Before long, people were calling LKI the company of humanity. But Cheryl never let herself be lulled by success. She knew when light spreads, darkness always comes looking for it. One night, as the scent of coffee lingered through the office, Kemp came in looking grave. Cheryl, I just heard that Kapper's losing major clients. Some have moved to us. Cheryl was quiet. You're not happy? He asked. I am, she said softly, but also sad. Oof. Why? Because someone is learning the lesson they once rejected through pain. She turned toward the glass window. Seattle glittered beyond, a sea of lights. Sometimes, she said, the fall of the arrogant isn't our victory, it's life-restoring balance. That night, she sent an email to the entire company. Never rejoice in someone else's failure. Rejoice only when we do what's right. By morning, employees had printed the email and taped it across the walls. Their next breakthrough came sooner than expected. An international tech giant, Solentrix Systems, invited LKI to present. They were seeking a new partner after ending their contract with Kapper Global. Cheryl stood before dozens of executives in a sleek San Francisco conference room under cold white lights. She didn't use flashy slides. Instead, she projected a straightforward image, the old photo of their basement office, with the white painted words, "We build with love, not fear." This, she said, is where we began. We had no power, no money, no backing. Only the belief that loyalty cannot be demanded, it must be given. From the heart. The room fell silent. Then the CEO of Solentrix asked, "Can you send me your financials?" "Of course," Cheryl said. "But first, may I ask, do you want a partner who's honest, or one who's afraid?" The man looked at her for a long moment, then stood and extended his hand. "I'll take honesty." The deal was signed that day. Value, $25 million. It was the turning point. LKI was no longer a rising star, but a genuine rival to Kapper Global. When the news broke, Dawson Kapper slammed the paper onto his desk. "She's no miracle," he growled. "Just a lucky act." But his advisor whispered, "Sir, Solentrix cancelled 3 projects with us to move to her firm." Dawson said nothing. He turned to the window, his face suddenly older by 10 years. Meanwhile, Cheryl sat alone at her desk in the glowing office in Seattle. Lorie came over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did it." She shook her head. "We did." He smiled, looking at her the way one looks at fire. "You know," he said softly, "my father used to tell me people stay loyal because they're afraid of losing their place. But you showed me people stay loyal because they want to stand beside what's right." Cheryl smiled, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's the empire we're building, you and I. One that doesn't need a throne, only hearts." She rose and walked into the hall, where the new company motto hung gleaming under the lights. "We build with loyalty, not fear." Around her, employees worked late, not out of obligation, but out of love for what they were creating together. As she left the office that night, Cheryl paused by the window. Across the street, a few former Kapper employees passed by. When they saw her, they bowed their heads politely. She smiled back, not with pride, not with bitterness. Because she understood real victory isn't when others kneel, but when you no longer need them to fall. Lorie pulled up to the curb to pick her up. On the drive home, he asked, "Tired?" "Yes," she said, "but the tired that feels like peace. For the first time, loyalty doesn't feel like a luxury." Lorie smiled. "And you know what? That's exactly when an empire is born." Seattle shimmered in the rearview mirror. They sat quietly, hand in hand. Outside, the world still spun by the laws of money and power. But somewhere in its corner, a company was proving that humanity could be the most enduring business model of all. When a castle falls, it doesn't collapse in a day. It fractures brick by brick, door by door, word by word, swallowed into silence. That was what was happening to Kapper Global. The 4th year after Cheryl's departure, the press asked, "What's happening inside the Kapper empire?" Stock prices dropped. Talented employees resigned one after another, partners shifted to LKI, and the bitter irony, every time LKI was praised for its human-centered leadership, Kapper was cited in business lectures as the perfect example of leading through fear. In Dawson Kapper's vast office, the golden light cast long shadows across his face, the same face once hailed as the symbol of 21st century power. Now it was only the weary outline of an aging man staring at a legacy gone hollow. "Sir," his financial advisor said quietly, "the shareholders are calling for an emergency meeting. They're saying LKI has taken nearly all our key contracts." Dawson said nothing. He held that morning's paper, Cheryl's face on the cover of Forbes, under the headline, "The Woman Who Built Trust in an Age of Fear." His hand trembled. "She's just a name," he muttered. "A lucky name. A story for the media." The advisor looked down, unable to say that the lucky name had just been invited as the keynote speaker at the Global Economic Summit in Aspen, the same stage Dawson had owned for 15 years. Meanwhile, in Seattle, Cheryl kept working as always. No champagne celebrations. No victory speeches. She told her team, "We can't afford pride. When others fall, that's when we must be most humble." Ramona asked, "But after everything they did to you, don't you feel even a little satisfied?" Cheryl smiled. "Satisfied with what? They built their empire on fear, and now fear is devouring it. We're just living on love." Lorie was still by her side, but a quiet restlessness stirred in him. One evening, sitting by the window, he said softly, "Mom wants to see you." Cheryl looked up. "After all these years?" She said, "She wants to apologize." The next day, Lorie Kapper arrived at the LKI office. The woman who once lived in a 30-room mansion in Connecticut now looked fragile, trembling. "Cheryl," she said, "I'm not here to justify anything. I'm here because I'm tired of silence." Cheryl poured her tea, her voice gentle but steady. "You don't need to say anything. I understand." "No, you don't," Hollis whispered, clutching her hand. "I watched my son suffer for years. I stayed quiet when they humiliated you because I feared Dawson. I was wrong." Cheryl looked into her eyes and saw genuine remorse. "You owe me nothing," she said softly. "But you can do one thing." "What's that?" "Teach him how to apologize." Hollis bowed her head. Tears splashed into her teacup. "He can't," she murmured. "Dawson doesn't know how to bow." Cheryl smiled faintly. "Then let him learn through loss." The media smelled blood. "The Kapper empire on the brink?" blared the Wall Street Review. "Shareholder revolt. Kapper Global shuts down 3 Asian branches." The world watched as a ship once built on arrogance began to sink quietly, painfully. One night, Dawson sat alone in his office, the TV flickering. On screen, Cheryl appeared at a charity broadcast. She said, "No one truly wins when others lose. The world only heals when we learn to rebuild trust." He stared at the screen for a long time. For the first time in years, his eyes were neither angry nor proud, only empty. "Rebuild trust," he repeated. "When did I lose it?" But before regret could settle, fear rose again. Thessaly, the identical cousin who had framed Cheryl years ago, entered his office, clutching a folder. "Uncle Dawson," she said, "there's a way to save Kapper. We can leak a story about how Cheryl forged the Solentrix deal. One rumor, and her stock will fall. Investors will come back." Dawson looked at her, weary. "Don't you see? Tricks like that are what killed this company. But if we don't fight, we'll lose everything." "I'd rather lose everything," he said, "than keep living in filth." Thessaly's eyes flashed with anger, and she stormed out. Dawson watched her leave, the fatigue sinking into his bones. Meanwhile, in Seattle, Cheryl was facing a new storm. An anonymous article had gone viral. LKI and CEO Cheryl Luckett accused of stealing Kapper trade secrets. This time, the evidence was sophisticated fake emails, altered contracts, falsified data. Kemp called an emergency meeting. "Cheryl, this is retaliation," he said. "I know," she replied. "We should sue them immediately." "No," Cheryl said calmly. "We don't fight darkness with more darkness." The room fell silent. Ramona nearly shouted through tears, "If you keep being this kind, they'll destroy you." Cheryl smiled, a quiet smile that somehow hurt to see. They already have, she said softly. They killed me once with my dignity, but Lorie taught me something: light doesn't need to shout to shine. The next morning, Cheryl held a press conference. No accusations, no anger. She said, "They can steal data, but not truth. I don't need to prove anything, because truth doesn't need defense, it only requires time." The media was stunned. No one expected such calm in the center of chaos. 2 weeks later, a federal investigation confirmed the documents were forged. Kapper Global was charged with disseminating false information. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Shareholders forced Dawson to resign. Thessaly was dismissed. The Kapper empire was left in ruins. When Dawson walked out of the building for the last time, reporters swarmed around him. One shouted, "Do you regret firing Cheryl Luckett?" He stopped, turned his back to the cameras, and said quietly, "Regret can't change the past. But maybe it's not too late to learn how to be human." That evening, Cheryl didn't watch the news. She and Lorie were having dinner in their small apartment. "Did you hear what happened to Kapper?" he asked. "I did," she said, "but I don't feel happy." And ate. Why not? Because every crack was once a wound. And maybe someone out there is finally learning to hurt the way I once did. Lorie took her hand. "You have a heart the world desperately needs." She smiled. "And you're the only patient enough to keep it whole." That night, as Seattle fell quiet, Cheryl opened the window. The wind swept through her hair. The city lights shimmered across the bay. She whispered, "Every dynasty has its cracks, but only those built on love know how to mend them." One April morning, sunlight streamed through the glass windows of LKI's Seattle office. Cheryl was reviewing a proposal for a new project when Ramona knocked on her door, eyes shining with emotion. "Miss Cheryl, what is it?" Ramona's hands trembled as she held out a white envelope with the Global Economic Forum seal. Cheryl opened it, read the first few lines, and fell silent. For a long time, Lorie walked in to find her frozen in place. "What's wrong?" She handed him the letter. "Dear Cheryl Luckett, founder of LKI Innovations, we are honored to invite you as the keynote speaker at this year's Global Economic Forum on the theme, The Future of Ethical Leadership." Lorie read it and smiled. "This is the same stage my father ruled for 15 years. "I know," Cheryl whispered, "and now it's yours." She sat down, her hands shaking slightly. "Why me?" "Because you're the only one who lived what the rest of them just talk about." A moment passed, and then her eyes began to burn, not with fear, but fire. "All right," she said. "If the world wants to listen, then I'll speak. Not about success, but about truth." That June, the mountains of Aspen shimmered in silver-green light. The Grand Convention Hall fluttered with flags from over 60 nations. Over 10,000 leaders, scholars, and executives filled every seat. Her name echoed through the speakers. "Please welcome Cheryl Luckett, founder of LKI Innovations and pioneer of the philosophy of human-centered leadership." Applause rose but mingled with curiosity. They wanted to see what the woman, once humiliated and expelled from Kapper, could teach them. Cheryl stepped onto the stage. No designer gown, no jewelry. Just a simple grey suit, the same worn shoes that had walked her through every trial, and a serene smile. Lorie sat in the front row, the same seat his father had claimed years ago. She nodded slightly when their eyes met, their old signal before every battle. She began, 5 years ago, I was given exactly 5 minutes to pack my desk. I was called a traitor, unworthy. But I didn't cry. I smiled and said, thank you, because they didn't realize they had just given me the greatest gift of all, freedom. The hall fell utterly silent. I once believed power was the loudest voice in the room. Now I know dignity is the only voice that still echoes after the room is empty. They built their empire on fear. I built my company on love. And love, ladies and gentlemen, has never been the weaker strategy, it's the most enduring one. In the front row, a man lowered his head, tears slipping down his face. People recognized him, the former CEO of a corporation once exposed for exploiting its workers. Cheryl paused, took a breath, then smiled softly. They tried to bury me, but they forgot I was a seed. The room erupted. 10,000 people rose. applauding not out of courtesy but reverence. Lorie was the first to stand, his eyes full of pride, gratitude, and that same awe he'd felt the day he first saw her walk down the aisle. That evening, the video of her speech went online. Within 24 hours, it had over 40 million views. Hundreds of thousands of comments flooded in. I worked for someone like Kapper. I quit today. I never believed ethics belonged in business until now. One woman, one sentence, and the world just redefined power. Business magazines worldwide called her the phoenix of modern leadership. But Cheryl didn't read them. That night, she sat on the balcony with Lorie, watching the city sparkle below. "You know what's strange," she murmured. "I don't feel like I've won. I feel at peace." He smiled. "That's the greatest victory, when you no longer need to defeat anyone." A week later, the forum sent her a handwritten note. "Your speech has been officially added to our global leadership curriculum." Cheryl chuckled softly. Imagine a woman who was fired now being taught in business schools. Lorie wrapped his arms around her. "You're not being taught, Cheryl. You're being remembered." Dawson Kapper sat alone in a crumbling house in Connecticut, watching the broadcast replay. When Cheryl reached the line, "They forgot I was a seed," his hands began to tremble. Holly interred quietly. "Dawson," she said, "she just did what you never could make people believe through truth." He stared at the screen. "She," his voice cracked, "did what I should have done from the start." She took his hand, gently. "Maybe it's not too late to learn." He shook his head, a weary smile flickering. "Learn, yes, but forgiveness? That's too late." End of foo. On the screen, Cheryl bowed beneath the shining words. "Build with love, not fear," Dawson whispered. "That's where I should have begun." When Cheryl returned to Seattle, more than 200 LKI employees lined the lobby. No confetti, no trophies, only applause, tears, and countless thank yous. Kemp stepped forward with a small bouquet. "Miss Cheryl," he said, voice trembling, "we're proud not because you spoke at the summit, but because we live every day inside what you spoke, love and respect." Cheryl smiled, turning to face everyone. "I'm just the one who planted the seeds. You're the garden." Laughter and tears filled the room. That night, Lorie took her to the beach. Seattle's sky shimmered with stars. They sat barefoot in the sand. "Do you think we've reached the destination?" Cheryl asked. Lorie smiled, shaking his head. "No, but we're walking the path you created, and that path has no end." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Then let's keep walking, together." "Always," he said, kissing her hair. Above them, the stars glittered, their reflections rippling on the water, and the phoenix rose again, not to burn, but to illuminate. That autumn, Seattle burned with the color of falling leaves. Along the streets that curved toward the bay, rows of red maples blazed like fire. Cheryl walked slowly along the sidewalk, coffee cup in hand, her eyes distant. Everything in her life felt complete now: love, work, honor, peace. Everything except one thing: the past. While reviewing a project plan one morning, Ramona knocked softly on the door. "Miss Cheryl, someone wants to see you." "A client?" Ramona hesitated, then shook her head. "No, it's Mr. Dawson Kapper." The air froze. Even the ticking clock seemed to pause. Cheryl looked through the glass wall. Outside, an older man stood holding his hat, his shoulders bowed. Sunlight caught the silver in his hair, the face that had once terrified her, now worn down by time. She nodded for Ramona to let him in. The door closed. The two sat facing each other. No hatred left between them, only a heavy quiet. "How have you been?" Dawson began, his voice rough. "I'm well," Cheryl answered softly. "And you?" "Old," he said with a tired laugh. "And lonely." She said nothing. He looked around the bright office, his eyes lingering on the wall that read, "We build with love, not fear." "You know," he said slowly, "I gave hundreds of speeches, ran thousands of meetings, yet never once made people truly believe me." He paused, meeting her eyes. "You did it with one sentence: build with love, not fear, and the whole world listened." "They didn't listen to me," Cheryl said. "They listened to the truth." Dawson bowed his head. "I didn't come to defend myself. I came to apologize. The air in the room grew still. I used to think weakness was a sin, he said. But you taught me that sometimes weakness is the only way to stay human. His voice cracked. If I could go back, I wouldn't have fired you that day. Cheryl studied the man who had once been her enemy, his eyes red, his pride stripped away. You know, she said quietly, I used to wish to hear those words, but now, I don't need them, because without that firing, I would never have found who I truly was. So, you forgive me? I don't need to forgive, she replied. Forgiveness still carries the wound. I let it go a long time ago. He was silent for a long moment, then nodded faintly. Rising, he placed an envelope on her desk. This is my remaining stake in Kapper Global. I transfer it to the 5 Minutes Foundation. Use it to help those once treated the way you were. Cheryl smiled gently. You're doing what a father should have done. Perhaps, he said. I'm only learning to be a father after losing a son. When he left, Cheryl stood at the window watching his frail figure fade into the crowd. She felt no triumph, no sorrow, only peace. In the following months, others from the old Kapper dynasty began to find their way to her. Not to ask for jobs, but to find themselves again. Thessaly, the cousin who once betrayed her, sent an email. I don't expect forgiveness, but every time I see the words build with love, not fear, I ache, because I realize I lived half my life in fear. Cheryl didn't reply. She added Thessaly's address to the mailing list for the Foundation's newsletter. A week later, Thessaly received an automated message from the 5 Minutes Foundation. Everyone gets 5 minutes to change their life. Start by stopping fear. None. Cheryl Luckett. Then came former Kapper employees. They showed up at conferences, wrote letters, even visited LKI's office to say one thing: thank you for teaching us what it means to work with trust again. Watching this, Kemp Reeves said softly, Miss Cheryl, I used to think kindness was a fairy tale, but now I see it's real right here, in a world that only believes in money. Cheryl smiled. Kindness doesn't need belief. It just needs to be done. Lorie slipped an arm around her shoulders. You've forgiven the whole world, haven't you? She shook her head with a quiet laugh. No. I've just learned not to let hatred teach me how to live. But the pilgrimage wasn't over. One morning, Cheryl received a letter from Connecticut. The handwriting shook Dawson's. Thank you for listening to an old man. Today, I've left Kapper. I've started volunteering with an orphan outreach program. I want to spend what's left of my life as a student, learning how to love again. If you still believe in miracles, consider this. My son chose the right woman. Tears filled Cheryl's eyes, not from pity, but from understanding. Sometimes the phoenix doesn't rise just for itself, but to help dying flames remember their warmth. That winter, Cheryl opened the new education center of the 5 Minutes Foundation in Atlanta, her hometown. The white building gleamed under the morning sunday. Above the gate, a simple inscription read, Everyone deserves their 5 minutes. Before hundreds of young faces, she spoke gently. 5 minutes can be the time it takes for someone to fire you, or the time you decide not to fall. For me, those 5 minutes changed everything. And now, I want to give those 5 minutes to you. Applause rose, echoing off the white walls. In the front row, she saw Hollis Kapper, tears glistening as she smiled. Farther back, Dawson sat leaning on his cane, his eyes bright despite his frailty. When Cheryl stepped down, he reached for her hand. Thank you, he whispered, for not turning pain into hatred. And thank you, she said, for not letting the past bury you. He nodded, smiling weakly. And then for the first time in his life, the man who once thought emotion was weakness wept. His tears fell onto her hand. That day, the papers didn't write about contracts, stock prices, or power. They printed a single line. An empire once divided met again, not to do business, but to be human. That night, Cheryl sat by the small lake behind the center. Lorie joined her, 2 cups of hot cocoa in his hands. You've done what my father spent his whole life searching for, he said. What's that? Peace. She rested her head on his shoulder, watching the moonlight ripple across the water. Funny, isn't it? She said. Everything started within 5 minutes, and led me to a lifetime. Lorie smiled. Not funny, magical. because those 5 minutes were the miracle. They sat, silently, the soft wind carrying children's laughter from afar. Cheryl closed her eyes. For the first time, she felt her heart completely free. That winter came earlier than usual. Seattle lay under a soft white veil. The glass towers shimmered with Christmas lights, and the wind off Elliott Bay carried its cold, briny breath through the streets. Cheryl sat alone in her office. A small Christmas tree glowed in the corner window, its branches heavy with cards from her team, each one a note of gratitude. Thank you, or thank you, LKI, for teaching us how to be human before teaching us how to work. On her desk lay a thick, cream-colored envelope, neatly sealed. In the upper corner, Dawson Kapper is written in an elegant, unsteady hand. The courier said he'd sent it before being admitted to the hospital. Cheryl took a deep breath and began to read. Dear Cheryl, if you're reading this, I probably no longer have the strength to see you again. I once thought dying was the only way to earn forgiveness, but now I understand sometimes living and admitting one's mistakes is the real redemption. I spent half my life believing power proved worth, but I never realized that true power isn't in making people fear you, it's in making them want to walk beside you. You've proven that. I used to hate you because you made me feel small. Now I know you only made me see I could be better. And that was the most terrifying thing for someone who once thought himself perfect. Thank you for not turning me into a monster in your story. Thank you for leaving me human, even as a flawed one. I've heard about your 5 Minutes Foundation. Today, I've signed over the remainder of my shares in Kappa Global to your fund. Don't build statues. Don't carve my name. Use it to give chances to those who were fired, dismissed, or told they weren't enough. Give them the 5 minutes I once took from you. A notary has witnessed the transfer. This is the final gift of a man who once thought he had everything, to the woman who taught him what enough truly means. When I close my eyes, I hope you and my son are still laughing somewhere, because that laughter is the one thing I could never buy. Dawson Kapper. When she finished reading, Cheryl didn't cry. She laid the letter down and sat in silence for a long time. Outside, snow drifted past the window, tiny flakes melting into glass. Lorie entered and saw the envelope in her hands. Is it? He's very weak, she said softly, but clear-minded and kind. Oh. Lorie read the letter, his eyes blurring. You know, he said. He had never written a letter in all his life, never apologized to anyone, but he wrote to you. Cheryl smiled gently. He didn't write to me. He wrote to himself to find peace. 3 days later, the hospital in Connecticut called. Mr. Kapper would like to see Mrs. Cheryl and Mr. Lorie. He said it's his last wish. The red-eye flight cut through a sky thick with snow. Outside the window, flakes brushed the wings. Inside, Lorie's hand held hers tightly. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. When they arrived, Hollis sat beside her husband's bed. Dawson looked frail, his skin pale, eyes sunken, but when he saw them, he smiled. Thank you for coming, he whispered. We came to thank you, Cheryl replied. For the letter. He nodded, then turned to his son. Son, I'm sorry. Lorie clasped his father's hand. You don't have to be. I never wanted you to be perfect, Dad. I just wanted you to know how to love. Dawson's smile trembled. Turns out, that was the hardest lesson of all. He looked at Cheryl. Thank you for keeping the human part of my son alive. She shook her head. No, sir. You gave him that part. I only helped him remember it. The room was quiet. The only sound was the soft rhythm of the ventilator, the glow of white hospital light. Dawson looked at them both and whispered, voice faint but steady, keep building with love. Never let the world make you afraid like I once was. Then he closed his eyes. No one knew that would be his final breath, gentle as falling snow, warm as a long-awaited goodbye. Cheryl didn't weep. She took Hollis's hand and said, He's at peace now. Hollis nodded through tears. Because of you. A week later, the funeral was held in the garden behind the old Kapper estate. No press, no grandeur, no spectacle. Only snow, the sound of a violin, and a few people who had truly mattered. When the priest finished his final words, Cheryl stepped forward and placed a small envelope atop the casket. Inside was the letter she'd written the night before. Dear Mr. Dawson, thank you for giving me 5 minutes. 5 minutes that once took everything from me, and then gave me back my whole self. Thank you for teaching me that power cannot make people happy, but kindness can. I promise to use your legacy to give those same 5 minutes to thousands more. And if, somewhere, you can see us, I hope you'll notice that the walls you built with fear are now replaced by homes built with love. Rest well, you, the man who once made the world tremble and left it, at last, a little warmer. Cheryl. She whispered, "Goodbye, Dawson," and turned away. As she did, the snow began to fall harder, flakes blanketing the garden, covering grief, hatred, and even the past itself. Lorie draped his coat over her shoulders. "I think he's smiling somewhere," he said. "I think so too," she whispered, "because today, at last, he's loved." She looked toward the frozen lake, the candlelight flickering against the ice. "Makes sense," she murmured. "This winter doesn't feel cold anymore." 3 months later, the 5 Minutes Foundation opened its second center in Chicago, the Kapper Learning Hall, named in honor of Dawson's will. In the lobby hung a great inscription: "Don't be afraid, just begin. Every good thing only needs the first 5 minutes of courage." At the opening, Cheryl stood beside Lorie and Hollis. Few words were spoken. Only one shared feeling was that what had once been broken was now mended by love. That evening, Cheryl lingered in the quiet hall after everyone had gone. The golden lights reflected on the inscription, making the letters seem alive, breathing. She smiled and whispered to herself, "This is the true winter letter, not written on paper, but in the kindness of human hearts." 10 years had passed since the morning Cheryl walked out of Kappa Global. Seattle had changed, no longer where she sought herself, but where she saw reflections of her journey in hundreds of others. The headquarters of LKI Innovations now stood 20 stories high, gleaming in the heart of downtown. The old words still hung along its bright hallways. "We build with love, not fear." People didn't come here for the highest salaries. They came because this was where they were seen, heard, and valued. The 5 Minutes Foundation had grown 212 branches across the U.S., thousands of lives rebuilt, hundreds of scholarships granted. On its homepage, Cheryl's old line remained: "Sometimes, all you need is 5 minutes to start over." Standing by her office window, she looked down at the waking city. Lorie came in with 2 cups of coffee. "You're up early again," he said. "Couldn't sleep," she smiled. "Something feels different this morning." "Different how?" "Quiet. Like the world is holding its breath before a new chapter begins." 3. He studied her, the soft light of dawn resting on the calm face of a woman who had survived every storm. "I know that look," he said gently. "Whenever you're this calm, you're about to do something big." Cheryl laughed. "Not this time. This time, I'm closing a chapter." An invitation stamped with the World Ethical Business Forum emblem lay on her desk. They invited her to deliver the keynote address, exactly 10 years after her legendary speech in Aspen. Lorie looked at it and asked, "What will you say?" She replied, her voice barely above a whisper, "Goodbye." That day, the Grand Hall in New York was packed. Banners lined the corridors. 10 years of ethical leadership, honoring Cheryl Luckett. As she walked onto the stage, the applause swelled around her. There was no anxiety this time, no fear, only the quiet certainty of someone who had come full circle. The light softened as she began to speak. 10 years ago, I was given exactly 5 minutes to clear my desk. I thought it was the end, but it turned out to be the invitation that began my life. The crowd fell silent. Over these years, I've been asked 1,000 times, "What's the secret to leadership?" And I've always had just one answer: choose love over fear. Because everything great in this life begins not with ambition but kindness. In the front row, a young woman wept. Cheryl recognized her, a once despairing stranger who had written 5 years earlier, saying Cheryl's 2025 speech had saved her life after she'd been fired. Today, she was the CEO of a thriving startup. Cheryl paused, took a breath, and smiled. "I'm no hero. I was just afraid like everyone else. But I learned something. You can't control how the world treats you. You can only choose how you respond, with love or with hate." I chose love, and it saved my life." And applause thundered through the hall. Thousands rose to their feet, but Cheryl didn't see the crowd. She saw only Lorie in the front row, his eyes glistening, his smile steady. She smiled back and spoke her final words, her voice trembling yet warm. "And if someone out there is listening, someone afraid, someone who thinks they've lost everything, I want you to know, 5 minutes can break you, but it can also save you. Just believe, then begin again." When it was over, she stepped outside. The New York morning was painted in soft rose light. Skyscrapers shimmered against the Hudson like glass aflame. Lorie took her hand. "It's done," he said. She smiled. "No, you're wrong. It's just beginning." "Beginning what?" "Learning how to live slowly. No more running, no more proving, just living." They strolled along the river. People passed, not because of who she was, but because peace radiated from her like quiet sunlight. A boy selling flowers ran up, holding out a single sunflower. "Ma'am, I saw you on TV," he said shyly. "You're the 5 minutes lady, right?" Cheryl laughed and handed him a small bill. "Thank you, little hero. You just gave me the best 5 minutes of my day." The boy grinned and dashed away. Lorie looked at her with eyes full of pride. "I'm proud of you, Cheryl, and I'm proud of us." "Oh, well." They stopped by the riverbank as the sun crested the skyline, golden, pure, and bright as the quiet tears of peace. Cheryl whispered, as if to the world itself. "Once, they gave me 5 minutes to leave. Today, I ask for 5 minutes to say thank you for letting me stay." She closed her eyes, letting the light wash over her face. That light seemed to fall not just on her, but on everyone who had ever heard her story, a reminder that no one is ever truly lost, as long as they still know how to love. If you asked me, the one who tells her story, who Cheryl Luckett truly was, I would say this: she wasn't merely an executive or a symbol of moral leadership. She was proof of a truth too easily forgotten in our loud, hurried world. The world doesn't need more powerful people. It needs more people who know how to love, even if it's only 5 minutes more each day. And so the story closes. No fireworks, no cheers, no grand finale. Only a sunrise radiant and still, shining on the smile of a woman once dismissed, now a light for the world. A last sunrise, not an ending, but a beginning, for every heart that chooses love over fear,